Now you are.
Did you carry this? You are.
All right, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
8:46, time to get started. Welcome to our February 2023 meeting. To begin, I'm just going to have Sean do a roll call because we do have a couple of new board members with us today.
Sure. I've done a silent roll call, and I've got 7 of our 8 partner agencies here. And I wanted to just take a moment and introduce Heidi to the board. She's been appointed for the city of Charleston, and we appreciate her being here. And I think Bobby Spry was maybe going to join us electronically, but she was also appointed by the mayor. Mr. Tolliver was reappointed by the mayor, so we're happy to have you at the table.
I think she did it because she gave me the key to the city.
She couldn't take it back, and we're going to do something in March for Eric and for Joe Coble. We certainly appreciate their time on the board and their contributions to us. They were fantastic board members. There's going to be a lot for Heidi and Bobby to step up to, but like I said in the email, I think they're certainly up for it. So we appreciate you being a part of our team.
Well, welcome. We're happy to have you. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes, and does anyone have any comments on those?
I make a motion to accept the minutes as mailed.
I'll second that.
All right, we've got a motion and a second to accept the minutes. Is there any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so as you all know, Eric had been our secretary. And so with his departure from the board, we have a secretary seat empty that needs to be filled. Don't know if anyone's particularly interested in that role. There's really not a whole lot of responsibility involved. Usually the secretary is part of our budget discussion every year, obviously part of the executive committee, and participates in executive committee roles. So willing to accept any nominations for secretary or hear from anybody about their thoughts.
Is there
I know.
anyone that wants the
Everybody wants it.
I know, it's
job? I don't want. Does anyone want the job? Willing to take the job? We'll go that way.
Literate, I would, but I can't
not a requirement.
That's a prerequisite.
No.
Yeah, we do the actual
Yeah.
business internally,
Oh,
so
okay.
it's on paper in the bylaws. The secretary is the administrator who oversees that. That was decades ago that they actually did that.
Oh, well, I don't have to type or anything.
He's got to sign your name.
There you go.
Nominate Gene?
Okay, so there's a,
How was you?
Well, I told them I couldn't type, or I would do it,
Okay.
but they said I didn't have to type.
well, okay, so we've got a nomination for Gene on the floor for secretary. Is there anyone willing to second that nomination?
I'll second it.
All right, so we've got a nomination and a second. All in favor of Gene as our new secretary, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Congratulations, Gene.
Thank you.
All right, Scott, do you want to handle the financials?
If y'all want to take a look there, typically I know if you don't look at the Schedule 1, that one of those numbers jumped out. There's like a negative in there in that short-term investments. And not a real alarm or a cause for concern. It's together with all of our money, but where we make that large allocation in the capital reserve. Typically, we're able to do drawdowns with the federal money, the grant money. It's like 2.5 to 3.5 million in operating. We had a couple of hang-ups with that grant. It should be approved here in the next week or so. So instead of having drawn down that money all year, we can draw it down at the end of the year. And this year was the first year was a 50% match, where it had been 100 for the past couple with COVID. So it'd take us a little bit longer to reach the full usage of that. So I mean, there's 3.5 coming in there, and then also we put in the capital reserve the matching number. So we still got to have a 3.5. We were going to spend it anyway. I typically don't make any allocation. I could have made an allocation here and have made it a positive number, but once we draw down, once the levy money hits this next month, we'll be back where we normally are, but again, it's just a little scary when you see a negative number there in the cash. So no concern really there, but even though it kind of looks like it. So on Schedule 2, for our statement of revenues and expenses, the total operating for the month of January was $208,399, and on the operating expense side, we had $1,327,763. Makes a little more sense when we look at the comparison there on Schedule 3 for the 7 months this year. Total operating revenues was the $1,427,336 compared to the previous year, the 7-month period of $921,097. And then on the expense side, currently we had the $8,234,609 compared to the previous year's $7,665,393. On Schedule 4 for the 4-week moving totals, revenue, as it has been here with that SOAR money, it's up 21, 29, 47% where it was previous year. But then actual ridership, it's still a steady 10% increase from what it was from the previous year. On the fare box on 4B totals, again, post-COVID, the average has been about 17,800, and we're right at that 15, 16, 17, little low. But again, winter months aren't quite as good in the period we're at right now. Better than last year, but again, overall, those numbers are down a little bit than the others. For the actual counts there on 4C with the fare box, ridership has increased 89,000 compared to the 74,000. So, you know, the actual numbers is about 16% increase. Pass usage still on 4D, roughly that 2/3 there percentage, 67%. It stayed steady. Just looking at our basic analytics there on Schedule 5, the average number of passengers a day was 3,105 compared to the previous January's 2,976, and for the month, just under 79,000 compared to the previous 73.5. And then on the Schedule 6 for the excess levy receipts, came in February, we got $187,000. So for the year, we're 4.85% down from where we were the previous year. And then I guess by next month should be the 6th month when the large check comes in, and we'll have a better idea of where we are, you know, year-to-date standing. Should be it, unless you make any questions.
Any questions for Scott on the financials? Okay. Sean, you want to handle number 6?
Yes, we have no invoices in excess of $5,000.
All right. Kurt, insurance report.
It's not going to be as enthusiastic as last month. We had a couple of claims that we finished up. One was back in June 15th of 2021. We had hit a car. We just settled that one right before the end of the month. In September, we hit a parked car, and then in January, we also hit another parked car as an enterprise car. So again, we are good at hitting parked cars. So luckily, that's, if we're going to get in an accident, parked car is probably the best way to do it. But that's the report today. Thank you.
Okay, Jacob, CAT operations.
Pretty much the same as last month. There's again a slight increase in the number of trips we've performed. And the SOAR receipts down there in the bottom, another slight increase. Still, it's a high of the program of 71,000. So it continues to increase slightly. Not much else. Just keep on doing a few more trips each month.
Okay. All right, Sean, do you want to introduce our guest from Emily Ford?
Yeah, so I'm really excited today. Several months ago, you all approved a comprehensive operational analysis, is what we used to call a system plan. And I was really excited because behind the scenes, Mary Kate and her team have been doing an excellent job of doing this work, and they were actually on site recently and did some interviews with our operators and checked out our system. And Todd and I had talked about it and wanted to see if Mary Kate would come and give an update of where we are, so you guys can actually see that a lot of these things you approved are actually happening behind the scenes for us. So Mary Kate, thank you for joining us today, and Travis, you can give her the screen or whatever we have to do. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me. Can I just share screen, or do I need a special permission or anything?
You can just share.
You're good.
Okay, great. Okay, so yes, thanks for the intro, Sean. My name is Mary Kate Marukian, and I'm a transit planner with Kimley Horn. And I've been working with Sean and his team on a comprehensive operational analysis. I'm a transit planner that focuses on route planning, system analysis, and then back-of-house analysis. So all the good, gritty details of maintenance and how the routes are running and performing. I love to nerd out over that stuff. So it's been really interesting. I've never worked with a system like this. I think KRT is a really impressive system, and there's a lot of potential there. So I'll walk you through our study process and some of the initial data that we've collected so far. And please jump in with questions. This doesn't have to be formal at all. So our COA is, like I said, it's a comprehensive operational analysis. So we like to look at different aspects of the service, how the service is currently performing. We spoke with operators to talk about how they like driving their routes, issues that they encounter, things they hear from customers frequently. We're also going to do a demographic analysis of the service area. Different things impact service other than just ridership and on-time performance. You know, who is living in the area, who needs the service, what's the makeup of the community that you serve. We're also going to look at microtransit assessments. So just a different provision of service or a different way of providing service instead of the traditional fixed route bus, to see if there's maybe a more efficient way to either overlay service to increase that ridership or replace portions or complete routes with other types of services. We're also going to look at your fare structure and policies. I know that you recently procured mobile ticketing software through Masabi, so we're not going to be making any recommendations about technology because you've already taken care of that, but maybe some pricing changes, policy changes, discounts, transfers, things like that. So as I mentioned, we are looking at the system as a whole and examining performance. So we're looking at things like ridership, schedule adherence, productivity, and we typically measure that passengers per hour. So this is a look at one of the data points that we've been examining of, you know, where the high ridership stops are. And as you can see, the ridership, something that we found that I find really interesting about this system is KRT carries a lot of folks and there is a lot of demand, but that demand is focused on a handful of routes. So the routes that we've been calling hill routes in our internal conversations that kind of run up into the more low dense areas, we're not really seeing the same amount of ridership, and that's not too surprising based on the schedules that are offered, the service frequency. So you do have a lot of demand in the downtown core and even towards the edges of some of those high demand routes, but it's really just focused on like 5 routes. And this is based on October 2022. So we have looked at annual ridership over a few years so that we can kind of see before COVID, during COVID, after COVID, but most transit agencies that we've seen, and as Kurt just mentioned, we're seeing pretty much back to pre-COVID numbers. There's definitely been some travel pattern changes, but overall, right now, you should see pretty close to what you saw pre-COVID. So as I mentioned, a couple routes are doing the bulk of the carrying of folks around. As you can see, there's really 4 routes that stick out. That's Route 1, 3, 2, 22, and the others are, they're trying. They're trying, and bless their hearts. So we are looking at weekday ridership because that will be the peak of the demand. The weekend ridership is similar to the weekday ridership. You don't offer Sunday service on all the routes, and I think that's fine. The demand just doesn't seem to be there on beyond these routes. So again, pretty consistent with weekday ridership is what we found. Except for Route 5, there might be a little bit more demand there. It could support Sunday service, but for now, it's the main routes that are carrying the most of the people on the weekdays are also carrying a good amount of folks on the weekend. And so when I say we look at productivity, we're looking at how many passengers is a route carrying per hour. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this again in a couple more slides when we talk about the potential for microtransit to support the KRT system. But when we're looking at passengers per hour, that's kind of how we judge, is fixed route service worth it? So there are only a few routes that are carrying more than 6 passengers an hour. And as I mentioned to Sean and Jacob and Kurt when we had our in-person workshop a couple weeks ago, 6 is about the maximum that we would say, 6 is about the minimum that we would say maybe you should consider a bus. And only a few routes are hitting that or exceeding it. And we also looked at current schedule adherence. So I don't know if any of you have kind of dug into the schedules a little bit, but the routes are pretty long, and that does create an opportunity for segments to be timed kind of like in between stops to be timed a little bit, make it difficult for the operators to meet that schedule. So the green you see here are the portions, the frequency of a route hitting that time point or bus stop at the scheduled time. Red is late and yellow is early. So there were a little bit more early arrivals early departures than we'd like to see, but we think that might be a symptom of an operator knowing, because operators know their routes, and the KRT operators are no exception. They are experts at their routes. They know when they're going to hit traffic, they know when they're going to hit delays, and they know who's getting on the bus. So if they know that, getting to that next stop is going to be a little tight, and Jerry's already on the bus, and Jerry's the only one that boards on Wednesdays at 2 p.m., they're going to leave early because they want to get to their end of line on time. So this is a signal to our team that in our recommendations, we're going to be looking at retiming some of those segments so that the operators have enough time. They're not speeding, they're not tempted to speed, they're not tempted to leave early, and passengers have a more consistent, reliable schedule. So another part of our system analysis is, again, looking at the performance data that KRT service has, but also comparing that to peers. So we have a tool that helps us select peers based on a few factors: demographic similarities, population density similarities, annual budgets for the transit agency, and then revenue miles traveled. So, and then some other things that are, like population growth, things like that. So based on those factors, TTA, Connect Transit, FAST here in North Carolina, and I don't know if I mentioned, I'm based out of our Raleigh office, but I live in Durham. So actually we've worked a little bit with the transit agency in Fayetteville, so I was excited to see them come up as a peer. And then METS Transit in Evansville, Indiana. So we've done a little bit of comparing so far on some of the kind kind of comparing the factors. We'll also compare the performance data as far as on-time performance, productivity, but we did want to point out something that we noticed, the cost per passenger trip. So the cost for KRT to bring one passenger to their destination on a one-way trip is about $15 per passenger. Comparatively, when looking at similarly sized peers with similar demographic makeups in their community, it's pretty high. It's a pretty expensive trip for KRT. The ridership is pretty similar to the other agencies. I'd say that something that stands out to me as a reason why that could be more expensive are the total number of revenue miles traveled by KRT. The trips are very long and you're picking up the same amount of passengers, but you're spending more time taking those passengers around. So the trips are much longer, and that creates more opportunity or less opportunity to be more efficient with those funds. So we are going to look at some of the routes, how long they are, how many hours are being spent on the road, just the general lengths of the route, see if we can realize some efficiency in the current system design. As I mentioned, we're looking at the demographic makeup of the area immediately surrounding the routes. We're also going to look at the demographics of the complete service area, maybe areas that KRT doesn't currently touch with fixed route service or paratransit. Something that we noticed is that the areas that have high population density, high employment density, folks that identify as somebody that has a disability or chronically ill, folks living below the poverty line, the areas where those populations are most dense are typically the areas where you see the highest transit usage and the highest transit need. And good news, those areas are currently being served with some level of fixed route service, generally, is what we saw in the KRT service area. We are going to do a deeper analysis of that data to see if the service levels that are serving those areas are appropriate. Are they frequent enough? Are they too frequent? And is fixed route service the most appropriate service for that area based on the densities that we're seeing? Some initial observations that we've seen, I've kind of mentioned them throughout, but the major destinations and the high need populations, as I said, do have some level of service in most cases that we've seen. The high demand routes are performing really well. I don't know if you saw on the previous slide, but compared to peers, you're carrying the same amount of passengers essentially on 5 routes, which that's crazy. That's really good. Deviations, there are quite a few variations of routes that we've noticed. That can be confusing and also just add travel time and add revenue miles, just more time for the buses to run. So we think simplifying, straightening out routes, that could be beneficial, as well as simplifying overall schedules, making them more consistent route to route. Straightening routes can provide a faster trip, not having to deviate into neighborhoods and then come back out. Also, one-seat rides, if you have a straighter route, the route's faster, it's more appealing to customers, and it's going to provide more opportunity to get from one major destination to another major destination, providing that one-seat ride, minimizing the need for transfers or long waits for transfers. As I mentioned, also, we're going to look at truncating routes or even potentially removing underperforming routes and seeing if we can serve that area in a different way. I think that that's an opportunity that we can shift resources without increasing the operating cost at all. I think there's definitely opportunity there to move some little shell game of funds from service to service. Again, we're going to take a look at the on-time performance and see if we can retime some of those segments and get those routes better on time. So, as I mentioned, the demographics are a really good indicator of where there is untapped demand or need in the larger service area that maybe isn't being served with fixed route service today. So we're going to look at what we call a transit propensity analysis, certain demographic criteria that we think will be more directly applicable to the Charleston area. So no vehicle households, low income households, so below the poverty line, usually 150%. People identifying as having a disability or chronically ill, level of education attainment, population density, and and employment density are there. But so where those populations are the most dense, and then where they overlap within a census tract, that's where we're going to see the highest need and likelihood that transit would be adopted. However, we can weight those because this is an example of what we did for the city of Durham in North Carolina. Not unlike most places, including Charleston, the density exists most often around the downtown core and then kind of spreads out as you go. It doesn't mean that the populations that need transit aren't there. It just means that they're living farther out. So if we can weight these criteria to say, okay, maybe the population density isn't there, but the people that are there, we're seeing have a high instance of poverty or no vehicles, low education attainment, etc. And then we can identify that area as being included in a potential microtransit zone. So this is another example of a study that we did in Cobb County, Georgia, where they do have some fixed route transit that connects with MARTA and moves folks around Cobb County, but the productivity was just not there. The demand was not there. So they did have a need, not enough to support fixed routes, so they looked at microtransit. And what that looked like in Cobb County, and I think this could be applicable to KRT and Charleston service area, is the paratransit vehicles branded with the agency logo, using agency drivers, identifying zones where you would have the highest likelihood of folks using some sort of transit service, and then identifying either pickup points or providing the opportunity for a curb-to-curb trip, either within the zone or at certain connection points. You could possibly connect in between zones. So this is a multi-zone approach where you draw a zone around a high demand area and then there's really nothing else around it. Then you draw a zone around another high demand area, but there's really nothing else around it. So you can move folks around within those tiny zones or connect them in between the zones, or in other places, like Pinellas County, Florida, you can draw a very large microtransit zone and folks can move freely within the zone with curb-to-curb service. That does have the potential to attract a lot of riders. It's more convenient. It's simpler to explain and understand for customers. However, it can be more expensive. So we have a tool that we use to estimate ridership and adoption of microtransit within the community based on those demographic features and the trips that we're just seeing around the service area in general, not with fixed route. We use cell phone data to track movements within the service area to see where are the major origins and where are the major destinations happening already, and how can we support that based on the demographics with a microtransit service. So we're going to look at that, and then talking with Sean and Kurt and Jacob, we're going to talk about desired frequency levels, because that will help us determine how many vehicles do we need to operate a service like that successfully, to minimize wait times for passengers, make sure that we're not leaving people, that we have enough seats on the vehicles for folks based on that estimated demand. And then the fare analysis, we are going to be using those peers that I mentioned to look at their fare structures. So this is an example of a fare analysis we did in the Triangle region. We compared the regional transit providers for their daily, weekly, monthly passes, their discount structures. They operate within 30 minutes of each other, and they provide connections to each other, but they all had different fare structures. It was a mess. It was very confusing. And so we looked at how to streamline those fares, and that's what we're looking at right now for KRT. How can we, what's an appropriate structure, looking at industry best practices, and then once we come up with what we feel is an appropriate pricing structure, we're going to test those changes on their potential effects on ridership and revenue. So typically, if you raise the price of a transit pass, you are going to see a decline in ridership. So you're going to be getting more fare box revenue for that one trip, but you're also going to lose some trips because folks will find that cost prohibitive. So we perform what we call an elasticity analysis that tests, what's that sweet spot between raising the cost too much and losing some ridership, but also gaining more revenue. And so you kind of even out. So we're going to propose discount potentially changes, transfer policy changes potentially, and then the cost of base and bulk passes. And then once those changes have been reviewed and approved by KRT and the board, we'll perform or once they've been reviewed, we'll do the necessary FTA Title VI equity analysis to make sure that any changes proposed for the fare analysis and any changes proposed with the service isn't disproportionately affecting or burdening low-income or minority populations. So those Title VI analyses are required for any fare change and for any service change that is considered major. So we will probably be doing a Title VI analysis for both the fare analysis and the system recommendations. And that's it. If anybody had any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mary Kate. I mean, that was, as the name suggests, really comprehensive.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That is a lot to take in. What does the next phase of your analysis look like? Timing-wise and next steps.
Yes, and I'd be happy to send out the schedule with the slides. I'll pass the slides on to Sean and his team after the meeting today. So right now we are finishing up our existing condition and route profile summary. We've actually finished the route profiles, but we were hoping to include the transit propensity analysis in the existing conditions. So the transit propensity analysis and the microtransit assessment are what is next. Those will be completed within the next month. The transit propensity analysis will be completed first, and then the microtransit assessment will be completed over the next month. So if you would like an update on that, I'd be happy to provide that to Sean, but we'll have the summary of the existing conditions and performance data assessment within the next 2 weeks.
That sounds wonderful. I'm glad that this is something that the board decided to pursue. I think that it's probably been too long since we've looked at these types of issues, and with our push in the past year or so to be updating our technology and we look for ways to better serve the community, I think that this fits in well. So does anyone else have any questions for Mary Kate? All right, thank you so much, Mary Kate, for your update.
Sure, of course. Thank you.
Okay, and that takes us to an update on the facility improvement plan.
Sure. So the facility improvement plan, if you guys walked in, you may have seen these large foam board displays that are showing some of the most recent renderings that Wendell have provided to us. Sorry, we're working with a lot of consultants at the same time right now. The exciting part about these foam boards is the reason behind why we had them printed up, and that was because last Friday, Senator Manchin invited us to come to his office to meet with him about this project specifically. As you all know, behind the scenes, we had those hurdles we had to cross in order to get to the point where we could go and market this to our congressional representatives. So when we got that the categorical exclusion, it gave us the ability to go out and say, hey, this is potentially real. The great thing for us was the feedback from Senator Machen was extremely positive. It was, let me figure out with my team how we can help, and that was the best thing we could hope for. So Todd attended there with Kurt and I, and I was really thankful for Todd's involvement because that really helped show just how important this is to KRT. We've since then we're setting up meetings with partner agencies, with shareholders. We're going to reach out to all the mayors of the cities that you all represent. I did want to give the opportunity, if any of you all want to be involved in those meetings with your mayors, or with the entities that you represent, just let me know. I'll send out emails whenever we schedule them with your local area. If you want to be in the room, that would be super helpful for us. But we're going to meet with labor unions. We're going to meet with, got already endorsements from the State Chamber of Commerce, the state public transit, the multimodal agency, I guess they're called now. So we're really pushing forward, and the next thing under new business, we'll talk a little bit, it's going to be involved in the facility improvement plan also, but everything so far is moving the way we've intended, and it's great for us.
What would, on the mayor's part, what would you be meeting for?
Yeah, so what we're going to do essentially is go to all these different shareholders and make, really for one, just pitch them the project. Hey, this is what we're trying to do.
On the
yes, on the new facility. Yes, here's what we're trying to do. Here's and the way we're saying that for one is, look, and this will help for Heidi too. So what we did was about a year ago, we did a facility assessment of our maintenance facility, which operates 24/7, 365 days a year, and we were able to identify about $23 million worth of safety and efficiency upgrades that would need to take place in order to bring it up, really up to just code and standards for today, not even for tomorrow, and the fact that all of these federal regulations that are coming, that are impending within the next 10 to 20 years are going to require us to lower our emissions. So whether it's looking at, we don't pretend we know what the answer is going to be, but whether it's electric, whether it's hydrogen, some of these alternative fuels, we currently can't do that with our existing facilities. So when we got that price tag of $23 million just to bring this almost 100-year-old building up to code, and then the idea of, hey, there's $1.7 billion that the FTA is awarding in grants. Just this federal fiscal year for low to no emission maintenance facilities and bus facility improvements, somebody's going to get that money. Why is it not KRT? Why are we not going after this? So the answer to that was, well, there's a lot of work behind the scenes you have to do just to get a project to the point where you can actually go out and even compete for a grant like this. So that's what we've done over the last year, is working with a consultant called Mendel to do all these designs, to look at this, and the board's been so receptive and so empowering for us to work with Wendell and with McKinley Horn and some of their sub-recipients of these projects. And what it's done is it's pushed us to this point where we've gotten a categorical exclusion from our environmentals, which is a big step. If you can't do that, you're going to be spending 2 or 3 years doing environmental work to make sure you can actually do a project. So once we got that categorical exclusion, again, now we're at this point. So what we'll do when we go out to those shareholders is tell them that story.
Where will you be meeting?
Where?
Yeah.
We'll take it to as many people as we can. So we'll go to the city. We don't have all those meetings.
You'll go to the city. Everybody won't meet at once.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to make it more personalized. So if a mayor wants to meet with us just in their office, we'll do that. If they want to invite us to a council meeting, we're more than happy. We're going to try to spread this out and just.
So basically, this is kind of a brainstorming of ideas, right?
Well, it's going to be, we're going to go out and we're going to tell them the work we've done, why we're doing it. So we want an efficient building that's safe. We want to make sure we capture this moment in time where we potentially could get this funding, because this is a generational thing for KRT. And then the ask of these individuals is, we want your support. We want you to be excited about what we're trying to do, because they all play an important role in this. Yes, it's here in on the west side of Charleston, but it should mean something to Montgomery. It should mean something to St. Albans and South, because this facility for our passengers, they may never come to this brand new facility, but what it's going to do is it's going to enable Chris and his maintenance team to keep buses running, to keep vans running.
Yeah, because just see what it means. Don't run a bus for one day.
Yeah. I mean, or days like today. If you all get done here and you want to walk over there, if it's pouring down rain, it's pouring down rain in our garage right now. I guarantee you. I'm amazed that it's not raining in here. And that's a
exactly
problem.
my thought.
I mean, that's a real problem.
I know, I've been around a lot of buildings. Are they gonna do a flat roofs on these buildings, or does it have to do flat roofs?
They might grow grass on these buildings.
Yeah, I think,
That's true, but
yeah, I mean,
seems like that's the problem with flat roofs.
sure, yeah. I can say I'm confident that Wendell is going to look at every single scenario. They've even talked as much as up here on the renderings, you'll see these windows. These windows can potentially automatically open when the
Right.
sensors tell them that the weather is the right temperature and that the wind is right to help cool the facility. They're gonna think about everything. We've got some green space built into the top here, so employees can actually go outside on top of the facility and have that area. I am confident, when Chris described the fact that it's gotta rain to a certain extent now on our flat top roofs in order for it to drain.
Yeah, it don't
That's
drain
insane.
right. I mean,
That's insane
we've had
to
the
me.
problems with them too.
This building is, what we've talked with Wendell about is we want to essentially, as best as we can, future-proof this facility. We recognize that a project of this scale is only gonna happen every, if we're lucky, 40 to 50 years, right? I mean, that's.
But what's the estimated cost? Do they have one yet?
Yeah, so the estimated cost, it keeps going up.
Oh, yeah,
it
will.
Not surprisingly, it's not written on there. The most recent cost is between $50 and $55 million. So, yeah, and those are inflated for 2 or 3. Yeah, there's Travis has got it up on the screen there. And it lays out the actual cost, the final design at $3 million, temporary location $2 million, demolition of $2 million, $40 million to actually construct the facility, $5 million in equipment. The solar canopies are $3 million. You see there on the right side of the screen of that rendering that the buses are potentially going to be covered up with canopies, which is really helpful for us when it's raining or especially if it's snowing. Drivers having to warm up their buses and get all that ice off there. If you can cover them and then use that real estate of the covering to actually be solar, Wendell has estimated that those solar units would produce enough energy to power our HVAC system. So you're going from a system now where if you walk over there, you see single pane windows that are busted out. We're literally just paying for natural gas that we're letting leak out into the environment. Instead, we would be creating our own energy that's going to do that. So that's really exciting for us.
If you get to do any tearing down or reconstruction and all that,
Yes, sir.
who gets the approval from EPA? Do you do it or the contractor?
From the EPA, so,
Yeah.
I mean, so what?
Because I've seen people start buildings and then they can't build back because of contamination of the soil.
Sure,
And
yeah.
that building would be a perfect example.
Yeah, so what we've been doing, Mr. Tolliver, is behind the scenes, if you look around our facility and you see all those spray painted areas, it looks like the Riddler was here, because some of them are question
Core
marks, and
drill.
some of them are different things. We've actually had core drillings done, we've had samples taken, and part of that categorical exclusion from the NEPA process was that we provided enough information to FDA that they were comfortable with giving us that exclusion. So that meant we didn't have to go to certain other layers, but throughout the entire process, through the actual construction and that process, our consultants and the team that will be leading this project will be making sure that we're still going through all those regulatory hoops. But all that work is done beforehand to minimize the chances of something like that happening. You know, could there be something under the? Yes, every time you start drilling and start demolishing something could happen. We've done the work beforehand to help minimize those impacts and what those costs could be.
That's a nice thing, right, about these consultants. Like, this is not stuff that we could do on our own. You know, we don't have the manpower or the knowledge base to do this type of groundwork on our own. So that's why we brought in these professionals who can give us appropriate recommendations and help us move forward. And I mean, as far as the cost of the project is concerned, you know, we've talked before. I mean, we needed to get this groundwork done so we could go out and market like we're beginning to be able to do, and to initiate the process of applying for grants. So I mean, that kind of moves us to the next point on the agenda under new business, which is grant applications.
Has any of this been started yet? I mean, have you got any grants yet to start? I mean, well, you started the groundwork.
Yeah, so
With
so what we have was in our budget for this current fiscal year, we have put aside $6 million. The state of West Virginia has sent us a letter awarding us $1.7 million
Yes.
in 5339 funds. So you're at 7.7 there, and then so that's obviously part of the match and then you go out to the.
So it's actually started, the process is actually started with
There are,
more drilling.
there are funds allocated to this, and yes, we've already spent, you know, at this point, almost $300,000 in design and the homework behind the scenes to get to this point. As far as, it's 30% design. Now, it was done that way so that you don't want to pay for 100% design of a project if you aren't confident you're gonna get it, right? I mean, that would be wasteful of money. That's what we're gonna see with these next two tasks. Those were tasks that Wendell wasn't gonna have us sign up for if we weren't confident we're gonna get the money. Now we're to the point where we're confident we have a real project and can say, yes, we need to now worry about grant assistance and phasing and logistics.
So you're confident now that you can build back on the property here and you can build over there, right?
Yes, 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 we are. Yes, we're very confident in Wendell's work and,
What was it, what, three phases, 4 phases? And we're paying for each phase as they go?
yeah,
for
this
what
gets
they're
us,
doing?
we're to a 30% design,
Yeah.
and the reason why we stopped there is because that is how much is reimbursable by federal grant dollars. So if we received the grant tomorrow, they would let us, they would help, those funds could help pay for that design. Yeah. And if we want to roll to the next.
Yeah, no, I think that brings us to the next point, which is, you know, going out and looking for more grant money and how we apply for those grants. So I think we have a proposal, and Sean's gonna walk us through that.
Sure, so what we have in front of us today, it's a proposal from Wendell, so the team we've already been working with, and there are two tasks. There's one task for grant assistance, and part of this grant assistance, we have identified a FTA grant that is due on April 13th. It's a low to no vehicle emissions / bus maintenance facility improvement grant through FTA. It's $1.7 billion in federal funding, and when you just mentioned the title of that grant, it's exactly what we're trying to do. Again, $1.7 billion is on the table, and so what we have to do is compile an application to FTA by that April 13th deadline. And a big part of that is something I mentioned last meeting, which was that 0 to no emission plan, that any entity who's applying for these federal funds has to have that plan. We currently at KRT do not have that plan of how we're going to transition to lower emissions. And so this grant assistance task that you see here, this $39,995 task from Wendell, would help us go through the hoops to create that plan and also help us through every single step of submitting this grant. We're submitting a $40 million grant. It's not a knock on Kurt, but we can use all the help we can get. We're gonna use Wendell's experience, and they've gone through this process many times, and they are confident they can do everything possible. We will at least know that if we don't get the grant, it's not because we didn't make the effort. Yeah, exactly. So
I'll make your motion, you apply for the grant assistance and phasing services. Is that what you need?
Yeah, so our recommendation is there's two tasks. The one is the grant assistance, the two is the phasing and logistics planning. Just to quickly go over that $45,250 is to look at the next step. If we get this project, if we get the funding, and if we have to temporarily locate our buses at a different area, whether it's just a parking lot or whatever else, what is that going to look like? How do you design that? And this is another one of those tasks that Wendell didn't want us to sign up for if we weren't sure we were going to get the environmentals passed. Why would we pay $45,000 for something that we weren't sure we were going to do? So we had a meeting last week. Todd, Ron, and Ron from Wendell met virtually, and Todd asked the questions, and they're good questions. It's, what else is going to pop up that we haven't? What other proposals are you going to send to us? And Ron had a good answer, and it was that there were things we held back, not because we didn't know them or identify them. We weren't going to waste KRT's funds if you weren't to that level.
So are you? I'll ask one more question.
No, you're fine.
So the the prep work for, well, be the EPA or the
DEP.
Right, the project, to get the project started with the soil samples and everything.
Yes.
Is this about complete?
Yes, so that categorical exclusion from the NEPA process, yes. There were requirements, there were core samplings drilled all over the property that were sent in. There were, yes is the short answer. Yes, sir, yes.
Yeah, so all of the initial prep work and qualifications, steps that we had to walk through to, get our initial clearance to proceed.
So there's nobody gonna come back and say you can't build right here because of
That
this
was my
environmental
concern.
issue or something, so that's already been clear.
No, we've jumped through the hoops with there were
Yeah.
questions about wildlife, bats, different things. We've got letters from the Fish and Wildlife Service letting us know we can move
With
forward.
your knowledge, you're not gonna do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
You never
don't get me
know.
wrong, there are
That was
things
my
that can pop up in any
concern
project.
about
I'm not gonna say there's no 0% chance. There are things that could pop up, but yes, our recommendation is that the KRT board allow us to accept this proposal from Wendell for a grand total of $87,895 for grant assistance and phasing and logistics planning.
So I think there is a motion on the table by Mr. Sutphin, and I couldn't completely hear it. Can you repeat your motion, Ms.? I've got an ear infection.
Write
so-
down what you like, and I'll say I said it.
Well, I
That
think,
usually works pretty good.
I think, what
Yeah, well,
KRT is recommending
yes.
is that the board, approve this proposal that we have received from Wendell in a total amount of approximately $87,000 for grant assistance and phasing and logistics planning.
I think that's what I said.
So you'll make a
I'll
motion?
make that motion.
That's
I'll
okay.
second.
All right, so we've got a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion or any more questions for Sean? If not, we'll
But, hey,
call-
Sean, I'd like to just
Yeah.
ask one more question.
Yes, sir.
When you get my age, you begin to think old. I'm thinking about more usage of the buses, such as shuttle buses from under the state to the civic center, shuttle buses during the upcoming regatta. If we can get a little bit ahead of that and inform people as to where these shuttle buses are gonna be.
Sure.
If we're gonna do that, I think that would be more good usage for the buses and for people like me. I know I'm older than anybody in this room, so that's why I think it's one.
Yes, sir. No, I think that's a great point.
You get around better.
Yeah, so that is a good point, good exposure for KRT and the community, and we're always looking for ways, obviously, to help the community and get our name out there, so.
Well, there are two big events coming up.
Right.
The, what's that car thing and the regatta?
Yeah.
Well, one thing I think a lot of people don't know that ought to be quiet is the parking. Say you're coming to Charleston for the regatta. If you advertise parking here and we shuttle from there, I mean, you may, but I've never seen that. Sure.
Well, we did that, you did it last time, and it met at the,
Big lots.
Big lots.
Yeah.
Right.
But you probably have to get permission to do
Yes.
that, but I think we could jump ahead, you'd have more participants and more usage of the buses.
Yeah, that's a good point, something that they can look into in advance of those events. So we do have a motion and a second on the table, for approval of this proposal from Wendell. Any more discussion? Okay, if not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Okay, motion carries. I think the last item for us to discuss today is the adoption of a policy in regard to some attendance requirements for KRT staff and drivers. So Sean, I know we talked about this a little bit at our previous meeting, and there needed to be some groundwork done and some review by our legal counsel, and I think that's been done now, so you want to give us a brief?
Sure. So last meeting, Mr. Ferris had a great comment about creating some incentives for operators to sign up for overtime. With a shortage in drivers, it's creating an issue for us where we don't want to cancel routes because we don't have operators, and if we could somehow incentivize them to come in on their day off of work, that would be a great thing. The question, the proposal that the union brought up last meeting was the concept of paying 2 times for overtime, so double time. Mr. Sutphin had asked me to come up with some calculations of what that could cost us. And last month, that would have cost us an extra $6,700. So it's not completely, any amount of money is substantial, but it's not crazy for us. Now, a couple of things too, so to make this is a complicated problem. It's not just a driver shortage or a driver incentives. So that's what it would have cost us last month, about $7,000 extra if you were being paid double time to drive. Now, at the same point, last Sunday we instituted a new markup, which, if you recall, we held off on for a couple rounds, or for at least one round of a markup, because what we had done was we reached out to an entity who had technology and software that helped us maximize our schedules, so it made it more efficient. So we could say, this is what we currently do, how can we maximize these efficiencies? That went into effect Sunday, and Jacob, what's been the feedback? You gave me some numbers of.
Yeah, so yesterday we had 7 drivers, sorry, that didn't have any work. They couldn't do anything. Today we have 5 drivers sitting down there with no work to do. So it reduced the number of drivers that were needed. And we had a bunch of open runs that we called trippers. That every day we assigned like 2-3 hour pieces, and all of those were eliminated. So the software reallocated the trips to make runs that are more efficient and scheduled.
Yeah, so it's increasing efficiency, and therefore, we've got extra drivers when we thought we might not have enough drivers, right?
Sure. Yeah. I'm not sliding the request of the 2 times overtime. I think with hopefully the case like Mr. Fair said, if you institute this and then no one needs overtime, then KRT doesn't pay anything, right? If you do need them, at least they're being rewarded for the time that they're taking out of their personal time to come help KRT as a team. So conceptually, I'm on track there. The only other thing, and Valerie touched on it, has come up is this question of, so what is creating this shortage of drivers? And a lot of it is just hiring drivers and getting them in here. Jacob just brought in a class of 5 drivers. Another aspect of that is attendance. It's when you have drivers who call off, who are here, and there's no direct penalty to calling off. You can use up all your time at KRT and call off work and nothing happens. You can do that as many times in a row as you want. And that's tough. It's tough on our operators who have to come fill that work when they're, when their peers are taking advantage of that system. So that is something that we've talked with the council about, is just this idea of being able to, within the confines of our authority prerogative of being able to set policies, we feel like there is the ability for us to create an absentee policy, as long as we make sure we educate, inform, and train our operators and all of our employees on what that actually looks like. So it's something we want to move forward with. But conceptually, this idea of the 2 times overtime.
And to be clear, any discussion of increasing overtime falls within a mandatory subject of bargaining with the labor union, because it is a wage. So anything the board wanted to in theory do or to authorize discussion thereof is subject to bargaining. And I would remind the board that the collective bargaining agreement between ATU and KRT expires in June, so negotiations will be going forward within the next couple of months.
So that's something that has to be bargained on,
This
on a
can be
contract, a new contract,
But
right?
conceptually, we could make an agreement with the ATU in the meantime.
You can have a set-aside agreement.
Or negotiated, yeah.
I'll make the motion that you try this program on a set-aside agreement for 1 year to see how it works. And if it pans out, then we've got a great thing. If it doesn't pan out, then we're not stuck with it.
So let me ask this clarifying question, because I just want to make sure I've got it straight in my mind. Are we talking about 2 different things? And I think we're talking about 2 different things here. One is an absentee policy that, and then one is, potential negotiations with the union in regards to overtime. So I think those are probably 2 different issues.
Well, mine is just strictly if you need drivers. That's why I say a set-aside policy. It's just an incentive that the KRT uses. If you need people, it's not in the contract, it's not binding. It's not binding other than amongst the gentlemen that make the agreement.
I think what legal counsel's saying though is that we can't implement any sort of, and she can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what she's saying is we cannot implement any sort of approval of overtime without going into the negotiations because of our current contract with the union. So we could authorize the implementation of an absentee policy, but we cannot authorize overtime. We have to go with.
Far be it from me from arguing with an attorney. That's never panned out, but I come
And
from
this is
an
not
industry that
this
does
is
this
not my
all the
area,
time.
this is what Grace
You
does,
can't do anything on the
so.
absentee thing unless it's through with the union's agreement and our agreement.
Well,
This
actually,
isn't a temporary thing.
you know, attendance policies are a little different because of the language in the contract is, there's a management rights clause called the authority prerogative, which allows KRT to set reasonable policies related to regulated performance, just like work rules.
Before a union contract is up?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So what, it is complicated, I'm sorry, because
Oh, I
we've
know,
covered
I
two
was
things.
in a
So
union for 30 years.
The attendance policy is something we can work on inside of KRT, and we can present to the employees, train them on, make sure they understand. What we are asking is for KRT as an authority to have the blessing of the board to negotiate, potentially negotiate, to explore with the union this 2 times pay for overtime. We can't just do that agreement with ATU without coming to you all, at least getting conceptually the ability to do that. So that's what we're asking.
So you need permission to negotiate with the union?
Yes.
Okay, and this is just on a need-to basis if your thing don't work?
Yeah.
And this is just a wage thing?
Yes.
Right, it's
Yeah.
just a wage,
Just overtime.
right, and that's all it is?
For next, yeah.
Incentive.
Yeah.
not a-
It's an
it's not a-
incentive for
Yeah.
an increase in overtime?
You could offer them a turkey instead of money.
Right.
What would be the problem there?
And this is for you all.
Could they give them a
come to
turkey
us
without-
and work these things out?
Yeah, exactly, yeah, and Mr. Ferris mentioned it last board meeting, it's a, you know, if this new schedule works, if we hire more drivers, KRT doesn't pay anything extra in overtime, it'd just be, the same, but it's the idea of, hey, let's appreciate the people who are taking the time out of
Yeah.
their
That's
life
all it
just
is.
to help us, and kind of, and hopefully, I mean, yeah, maybe we don't have to use it because we've made some behind the scene changes, or maybe we've had more people come on staff. But it would give us the ability to have those negotiations with.
So Grace, does
Well, I'm not
KRT
sure.
have the authority to implement the attendance policy and work on that on its own, or is that something that we need
Yes.
to? Okay, okay. So we don't need to make a motion on the attendance.
You don't need
I
to make a
withdraw my
motion.
But
motion.
there's, you know,
Yeah. But if the board's interested in giving KRT management the authority to negotiate, on the overtime issue, that's something that would require a motion.
Well, you need that then, don't you?
Well, I mean, I personally, I would
Right.
be in support of such,
Yeah,
of such an effort. So, I mean, is there anyone who's willing to make a motion?
I'll make a motion for the KRT to be able to negotiate with the subject
Yep.
about the overtime. with-
Right, I'll second that.
Okay, all right, so we've got a motion and a second on the table in regard to, overtime negotiations with the union. Is there any additional discussion? Okay, if not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Okay, motion carries. So, I think that was a little bit longer of a meeting than sometimes we have, but I think we made a lot of progress. Travis, are there any questions online?
No, they're not.
Okay, all right, well.
I have a suggestion on this passenger for price. Have these riders move closer to town.
There you go.
You think you
Yeah,
get
that's,
people
that's
saying,
probably the
oh,
disadvantage of, West Virginia just being a more rural area.
There's nothing you can do about they live out.
Carriages are all flat land.
That's not like New York City, everybody lives right on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell, right, just based on the mileage of the routes that we run compared to, yeah, so, but.
Geography is challenging.
All right, everyone, well, with that, I think we're done.